Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Idle Game CSS course. We are going to talk about CSS Inheritance, which is an incredibly useful topic to understand before tackling positioning of elements and layout boxes, but also to help you more effectively style your game and to prevent a lot of confusion. Before we begin, I first want to announce that with summer underway, I'll be having a lot more free time, which means I'll do my best to upload every 3 to 5 days. It means over the next 2 months, this course will be finished, so if you aren't subscribed yet, now is the best time to do so. It's free and you can always change your mind later. With that said, let's move on to inheritance. First things first, the concept of inheritance in CSS stems from the fact that HTML elements have a hierarchical relationship. This means they are separated into parent elements and child elements. Parent elements then contain child elements that inherit their properties, but only if the properties are inheritable and they are not overwritten by a different value. And that is extremely important, but more on that in just a second. I want to first specify that CSS Inheritance plays a massive role in the layout section when you are creating new layout boxes. This is due to the fact that layout boxes can contain things, and just to clarify by things, I mean upgrades, achievements, buildings, etc., headers, footers, but also other layout boxes. This designates layout boxes as parent elements, so their inheritable properties are passed to their contents. So to clarify this concept, let's look at an example from our game. We have a buildings box that contains various buildings, but also the buildings header. In this scenario, the buildings box is the parent element and everything inside it are child elements. If we select the buildings box using its identifier and set its font family to monospace, which is an inheritable property, you'll notice that every element within the box, including the headers, will display in the monospace font. And this demonstrates how inheritance works in CSS, where child elements inherit styles from their parent element. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that properties are inherited only if they are, well, first of all, inheritable, and second of all, not overwritten by a different value. Let's talk about the first point, or how to find out if a property is inheritable or not. You can find this out on the Property List website, which I provided you with in episode 3 of this course, but it's also linked in the description of this video. And the first thing you do is you click on some kind of property here to read more about it. So for example, let's click on this background property here. And when you scroll down a little, and this is the same with any kind of property, right? You scroll down here and there's this table here. And right here, it tells you whether a property is inherited by default or not. But after a while, you will notice that most CSS properties are not inheritable by default, according to this table here, right? In that case, why should we even care about inheritance when only a select few properties are supposedly inheritable? Well, CSS has an incredibly useful inherit value that most properties support. Remember, when this table tells you that a property is not inheritable, that just means it is not inherited by default. The property can still be inherited if you manually set the property value in the child element to inherit. You can find out whether a property supports this value by scrolling down a little bit and then finding this property values list, which tells you what values a property accepts. For example, here we can see that the background property does support the inherit value. And just for some specification, the inherit value makes it so the property is inherited from its parent element. There are several other values that properties can accept which control inheritance in a similar way, those being the initial, revert, and unset values. However, you most likely won't need to know about those when you just start out learning about inheritance. If you are interested, however, there are links in the description where you can read the documentation about each one of those values. Next up, I want to talk about how properties, even when inheritable, will not be inherited by a child element if its value is already set. For example, earlier in the video, we changed the font family of the buildings box to monospace. But if the font family were to be already set in the .building class, which all buildings have automatically, to something like fantasy, the property value of the child elements, or in this case the buildings that have the .building class attached, would take precedence over the inherited value from the parent element. This means that only the headers would inherit the monospace font from the buildings box, while the buildings themselves would keep its fantasy font set by the .building class. With all that said, you might be feeling a little bit confused right now, and that's completely normal. CSS can be tricky, especially when you're just starting out, and inheritance is a more advanced concept than what we've covered so far. Either way, congratulations on making it this far into the course. I assure you that with time and practice, it does become a lot easier and more manageable. With that said, inheritance is especially useful if you want to change a lot of things at once with CSS. Inside of our game, I want to change the font of absolutely everything, including the tooltips, to be something better looking. We could just change the font family of each element, but that would be a pretty dumb way to do it, as it would take ages. So instead, let's use inheritance to our advantage. Right, so that sounds easy, but how do we actually go about doing this? Well, we first need to figure out what is the parent of every element inside of our game, or inside Idle Game Maker. So when we hit inspect element on, for example, a building, we gotta go up a little bit, because we'd see that this thing-4 is a child element of the buildings box here, which is a child element of this content, which is a child element of this container with the game identifier and a class of on. So if we use a combine selector, this one right here, which we actually changed in episode 1 of the Idle Game Maker CSS course, if you remember, or actually it was episode 2, I think. And we changed this to fix a bug with our background image. So if we now add another command to this, a font family property to this, and I think System UI actually looks the best. It looks, in my opinion, a lot cleaner than what we've had previously. You can see that absolutely everything has changed fonts, including our tooltips, even this info section here and the settings section here. And this is due to inheritance, because this game container, right, is the parent element of every single thing inside of our game. So in order to achieve this in our game, all we have to do is find this hashtag game.on combine selector. If you don't have it in your style sheet, you can simply add it like so. And we just add the font family property to it with a value of system UI. Now, there's a link in the description that contains the documentation for the font family if you want to use a different font in your game than system UI. By the way, when we now just save our changes, the font of everything inside of our game will be changed permanently. Right, and that's gonna be it for this episode. We haven't used inheritance much yet, because it will play a much bigger role in future episodes when we will be configuring the layout of our game. Either way, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really enjoy what I do here, feel free to check out my Patreon, where for only $2 a month, you can get some pretty nice perks, such as having your name included in the outro of my videos. But it would also make me really happy. So once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.